What happened to Marguerite Holly was such a tragedy. This should never have happened to anyone.
In Edgewater, Florida, a woman is found dead after her house goes up in flames.
The closer we all looked at what really happened in the house, the more mysterious it became.
Amidst a maze of confusing evidence, authorities must determine what really happened here and why.
When we finally figured it out, it took everyone by surprise.
Edgewater, Florida, a quiet, peaceful community located along the banks of the Indian River. But even in the midst of tranquility, in an instant, things can change. Around 10 a.m., firefighters respond to a house fire in a residential neighborhood. One of the first to arrive on the scene is Tracy Barlow.
When we arrived at the scene, we noticed a large column of smoke, along with a lot of smoke billowing from underneath the eaves of the house. You know, smoke pushing and fire pushing out of actually the windows of the house itself.
The home belongs to Marguerite Holly, a retired nurse who is well liked by neighbors and friends. As firefighters prepare to battle the blaze, they fear she might still be inside.
One of our worst nightmares is, actually going in there to do our search and rescue. Look and make sure everybody got out of the house, and actually finding someone during the search and rescue, that didn't get out alive.
But one sign quickly gives them hope that Marguerite Holly hasn't been caught in the flames.
We noticed that the garage door was open. There was no car inside. So, we hoped that, whoever lived there had left, and there was nobody inside at the time.
But as firefighters make their way to the back of the house, they realize that tragedy has struck.
As we're extinguishing the fire in the back bedroom and starting our search in that area, that's when we actually happened to come upon a body.
The body is that of Marguerite Holly. The question now is, how did this happen? Edgewater Police Detective Dave Gamel heads to the scene to investigate what looks like a routine accidental death.
Well, at that point, we assumed it was just an accidental fire. We looked at possibly she left the stove on, maybe a heater who shorted out. It really could have been a multitude of anything.
But when Gamel surveys the crime scene, he knows immediately that something isn't right. The position of the victim's body suggests that this fire was no accident.
If there's a fire, a person's going to try to crawl out or stand up. And if they don't make it, usually their body will be in like a fetal position. But she was on her back, totally sprawled out, not trying to cover herself in any way.
The facts just don't add up. Detectives need to learn more about this fire, and it's up to Fire Inspector Murray McDonald to piece together what really happened.
There was a large gaping hole in the floor of the bedroom. Considering that the fire only burned for about 45 minutes or so, that's a tremendous amount of damage in a very short period of time.
McDonald also notes that a broken oil lamp was found near the body. Could it have started the fire and caused all the damage? McDonald doesn't think so.
The amount of damage that I saw versus the quantity of fuel that would have been housed in that particular lamp just wasn't consistent.
What could have caused the large hole in the floor? To answer that question, McDonald reconstructs the scenario he found at Marguerite Holly's house.
What we're going to do is use lamp oil, and in the same amount as we believe was in the Holly home. On this section of flooring, we're going to use an equal amount of lamp oil. But in addition to that, we're going to add some accelerant.
The presence of an accelerant might explain the size of the hole and clearly indicate that the fire was set on purpose. Once the fires burn themselves out, McDonald is left with some interesting results.
The test burn that we did using only the aromatic lamp oil did a little surface burn and some damage just to the top boards, where the second test that we did using the aromatic lamp oil and the additional accelerant left a bigger degree of damage and more of an equal representation to the floor in the Holley home.
The test proves that the oil lamp alone did not start the fire. The damage is too severe, and lab results soon confirm it. Charcoal lighter fluid is present in Marguerite Holley's bedroom. Investigators conclude an arson has taken place, but they still don't know if Marguerite was the intended victim or an unfortunate mistake. Criminal profiler Dale Hinman is called in to help provide some answers.
Profilers are trained to look beyond the physical evidence in a crime scene and to analyze the behavioral clues that are left behind by the perpetrator. Based on our experience, profilers know that when a fire is set intentionally in a residence, it's almost always done to cover up some other very serious crime.
Agent Hinman has seen this scenario many times before, and it usually means one thing.
Given the facts of this case, I was fairly certain that we were going to find out that the real reason for this crime was murder. Why would someone go to all that trouble to set the fire if he wasn't trying to cover up some very serious crime?
Marguerite Holley is found dead after her home is set ablaze. The reason? Criminal profiler Dale Hinman suspects it was done to cover up a murder, and the autopsy confirms it.
The victim's lungs and throat were clear of any soot or smoke, so if the victim had died as a result of the fire, the soot and smoke should have been there. This means that she died before the fire was started.
But if the fire didn't kill Marguerite, what did?
The medical examiner determined that the actual cause of death was strangulation, so the victim was dead before the fire was started. So the fire was started to cover up the victim's murder.
But who would have wanted Marguerite Holley dead? Agent Hinman and detectives Gamel and McDonald head to the crime scene to try to answer that question.
This was a number of turns to get here to the house. I wonder how the guy found this house from among all the other houses in the neighborhood. So it's not like if it was out more on a main road, then this would have more likelihood of it being a stranger, but if he has to come all the way to the house.
Hinman's profile begins to take shape. She suspects Marguerite Holley's killer wasn't a stranger to the victim.
That's some crime scene photos, Dale.
Was the victim's garage door open at the time the fire was reported?
Yes, it was actually.
And I understand she had a vehicle. Was that taken by the perpetrator?
Yes.
Since none of Marguerite's friends or relatives had keys to her car, detectives assume it was taken by her killer.
So that means that the offender left the victim's house driving her car in broad daylight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is somebody who's probably been here before and is very familiar and comfortable in this area because it's a high-risk crime for him.
Hinman suspects that the killer knew Marguerite well enough that he could be seen at her house and driving her car without raising suspicion. But something they find in the back of the house appears to suggest the opposite.
Right over here's the door where we believe was the point of entry. And if you notice where the jalousy's broken, it's right there by the locking mechanism,
Right.
so they can reach in.
But if the killer knew Marguerite, why did he break in through the back window? And is that what really happened?
Based on these photographs, it looks like the screen and the glass are in the wrong position.
That's correct. When the screen was pushed through, the screen should have hit the ground, the glass should have been on top of it, but it was opposite.
The evidence suggests that the door was actually broken from the inside, strengthening Hinman's case.
Sounds like a staged burglary, and the type of person who would stage a burglary is somebody who's known to the victim and thinks that they're going to become a suspect in this case.
We need to be focusing on somebody.
As detectives prepare to act on this new information, something turns up that casts doubt on Hinman's theory that the victim knew her killer. In the neighboring town of New Smyrna Beach, investigators find Marguerite Holly's missing car.
This is New Smyrna Beach. People come here to enjoy the sun and a lot of beach activities. The city actually borders Edgewater.
But the street where Marguerite's car is found is far from the idyllic shoreline.
Okay, right up here where we're coming to is where Margaret Holly's vehicle was located. It was parked here. This is the west side of New Smyrna. It is the seedier side of town.
How did Marguerite's car end up here? There's only one reason people come to this rundown neighborhood.
This area here is a high crime area, and there is a lot of drug activity.
Investigators begin to wonder if her death is simply a property-motivated crime.
And because of the location, we thought maybe her vehicle was stolen and sold for drugs.
But to Agent Hinman, things just aren't adding up. She doesn't believe what they're looking at is a drug-related crime.
When we all sat down and considered this as a possible scenario, we decided that wasn't the case. Mrs. Holly was not the kind of person who would associate with people who did drugs. And since I was convinced that Mrs. Holly knew her killer, this could be just one more thing that he had done to try to throw the police off the trail.
And he may have succeeded. Just 5 miles away, a 911 call reports another woman murdered in her own home. Detective Dan Kennedy is assigned to investigate.
This is the home that we received the 911 telephone call from. It's a beautiful old home located in a very quiet residential area.
This time, the victim's name is Whitney Gunn. Like Marguerite Holly, Whitney lived alone. And, once again, police find evidence that a jalousie glass door has been tampered with.
What we think the intruder did was approach the back door, reach in through an open jalousie glass window, cut the screen, reach his hand in and unlock the door, and then he entered the residence there.
Has Marguerite's killer struck again? Next on Body of Evidence. When a second woman is murdered in her own bedroom, just miles from the home of Marguerite Holly, investigators wonder if they could have a serial killer on their hands. Profiler Dale Hinman meets with detectives Gamel and Kennedy to see if there's a link between the two cases. They need to know if it's time to rethink the kind of killer they're looking for.
In both cases, they lived alone and they were killed in their own homes, in their bedrooms.
And if you look at the map, you can see New Smyrna here and Edgewater is here, and they were within 5 miles of one another.
Let's make a list of what the similarities are in these two cases.
At first glance, the similarities abound. Both victims are women who lived alone. Both were killed by an intruder who tampered with a jalousie glass door. But for Hinman, the differences are just as important.
Well, I know in my case, my victim had a VCR that was stolen, her purse was stolen, and her car was stolen.
Was anything taken from your victim?
No.
Mrs. Holly was strangled to death.
In my case, Mrs. Gunn was a victim of blunt force trauma, and she was also sexually assaulted.
There was no sexual assault in my case.
But one difference overshadows all the rest: the arson at Marguerite Holly's home.
The starting of the fire to try and conceal the crime that has occurred in the one case and no fire in the other is really significant, and I think that they were perpetrated by two different individuals. So if the two cases are unrelated, then in the Marguerite Holly case, you should be focusing on an individual who has some personal connection to Mrs. Holly and a reason to feel that he may become a suspect in the case, and that's why he's trying to get rid of evidence and send you in the wrong direction.
The team concludes there is no serial killer prowling through town. To catch Marguerite's murderer, they must return to the original profile.
We really needed to focus on people who had a connection to Mrs. Holly, someone who had been to her house before and who could come and go without looking suspicious.
As detectives pour through lists of family and friends, one by one, each name is eliminated. It's time to widen the net.
In this type of homicide investigation, the police generally begin by looking at the family and the close friends of the victim. Once these people are eliminated, they move out to other individuals who had access to the victim's home and knew the victim, handymen, people who made a delivery at the home. And as detectives started to look at these type of people, one man stood out.
The man is Israel Lisboa, and he had virtually unlimited access to Marguerite's home.
Lisboa was acting as her handyman for approximately a year, 2 years, and fixing plumbing, cutting her yard, doing different things for her.
When authorities bring Lisboa in for questioning, it's clear that he sees himself as more than a handyman.
What kind of a relationship did you have with Mrs. Hall?
She was my best friend.
Was she?
She's more like my best friend, somebody you can confide in and anything, and she'd tell me just about anything. It was more like what it was.
How old?
But to a profiler, his words have a different meaning.
When Lisboa said he was Mrs. Holly's best friend, this made us all very suspicious. The family had told us that Lisboa just did odd jobs around Mrs. Holly's home, and she paid him for his work. She was his employer, not his friend.
But if Lisboa is their man, investigators need proof. And the fire that once baffled them could ultimately provide the evidence they need.
Since an accelerant was used to start the fire, we thought if we brought an accelerant-sniffing dog to Lisboa's residence, perhaps he could find traces of that accelerant.
Coming up, can investigators tie Lisboa to Marguerite Holly's murder?
We brought the dog here to find anything that may connect the suspect with the fire scene, the homicide scene. The dog is basically a tool to collect that evidence.
If there's anything here, it's up to Ken Sigler and his specially trained dog to find it.
Accelerant detecting canine is trained to detect minute amount of latent accelerants, a kerosene or a gasoline, anything that may be used to intensify or spread a fire. And searching through the living room, the main living areas, the dog really wasn't finding anything, wasn't showing any real interest in anything.
But all that changes as the team moves further into the house.
Consequently, searching one of the bedrooms, we did find a pile of laundry, and once the dog searched that, she did alert to a shirt in that laundry pile. We did collect this shirt for lab analysis, determine what exactly was on the shirt.
As investigators wait for the lab results, they interview Lisboa's friends, and a twisted picture of the handyman begins to emerge.
Lisboa would not only charge exorbitant amounts of money to do repairs, but he would actually make the damage, cause the damage, by loosening pipes and then tell her, look, you got a leak, and then he'd go back and tighten the pipes up and charge her all kinds of money for it.
And that's not the only way Lisboa has been getting money from Marguerite.
Through her records, we found that she had loaned Lisboa large sums of money.
How much money would you say she's given to you?
Around $10,000.
In how long of a time?
A couple of years.
Now, investigators have a motive for murder.
As the police talked to the victim's family and friends, it became clear that Mrs. Holly was fed up with Lisboa's schemes. We all thought he killed her to prevent her from going to the police.
And when the lab results come back, they confirm detectives' suspicions.
When we received the lab report from the shirt that we had taken out of Lisboa's residence, the lab result revealed that the shirt had charcoal lighter fluid on it, which matched the charcoal lighter fluid which was found around Mrs. Holly's body.
It's the final proof they've been waiting for. Israel Lisboa is convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Lisboa killed Mrs. Holly to prevent her from going to the police to report that he had bilked her out of her hard-earned savings. We owed it to her to solve this case. By correctly interpreting the clues, we were able to identify her killer and make him pay for what he did.